Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're launching a full-scale psychological investigation into one of the absolute most insidious dynamics in human relationships, covert narcissism. We're not just going to sit here and list off bad behaviors today. No, we're deconstructing this. We're treating it like a literal crime scene to uncover the hidden forces, the unconscious drives, and the deep neurological mechanisms that systematically dismantle a victim's reality. If you've ever felt completely exhausted, maybe confused, or even physically ill after dealing with someone who seems, well, perfectly nice to everyone else, you are in exactly the right place.
Let's kick things off with a massive mystery. Why do victims of subtle psychological manipulation end up developing severe, undeniable physical ailments, even when there are absolutely no visible bruises and nothing seems overtly wrong to the outside world? We have to look right past what people see, which is usually just a relationship that's hitting a rough patch, and examine what is actually happening, which is a total, systematic erosion of the victim's nervous system. I want you to really let this sink in. When you're interacting with a covert narcissist, you are not talking to a fully formed, authentic human being. You're interacting with a highly reactive defense mechanism. Covert narcissism isn't just a bad attitude. It is this rigid, incredibly heavy psychological armor forged for survival to protect a deeply fragile, inadequate inner core from feeling toxic shame. They've built this false self, and that false self demands constant validation and control just to stay inflated. If you threaten that inflation, you literally become a threat to their psychological survival.
So let's step right into Section 1, the somatic crime scene.
To truly deconstruct what's happening, we have to look at the physical evidence left behind by relational trauma. Because here's the thing, the body keeps a flawless record of what the mind is desperately trying to rationalize. Autoimmune disorders, chronic fatigue, intense jaw and throat tension, migraines, depersonalization. The chronic stress of this cognitive dissonance takes a profound toll. Because the abuse is so subtle and low level, the nervous system's response gets interrupted. Your body mobilizes for fight or flight, but the threat is so ambiguous that the action is never completed. So you get stuck. You're locked in a state of freeze or chronic fawning, constantly shape-shifting just to keep the peace. You're flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, literally withholding your truth, and your body physically collapses because it's living in a state of perpetual, unresolved threat.
Moving on to Section 2, Architecture of the Mask.
Now we have to put our suspect under the microscope, the vulnerable or covert narcissist, and completely strip away their curated facade. It's a massive paradox, really. What everyone else sees is this shy, introverted, highly sensitive, and selfless person, maybe even a victim. But the psychological reality underneath, completely different story. Beneath that incredibly convincing mask of humility lies a grandiose, exploitative core. They're hypersensitive to criticism and deeply entitled, but they hide it all behind passive aggression instead of overt dominance. They basically weaponize their perceived suffering to drain others and gain sympathy. It's an unconscious, brilliant camouflage designed to extract narcissistic supply without ever exposing how fragile they really are. So how on earth do they pull off this double life? They use a mechanism called compartmentalization. Think of their mind as a massive building with completely isolated rooms. They act like a puppet master, manipulating totally different realities just by opening and closing separate doors. In one room, they are the perfectly devoted partner. In another, they are engaged in ruthless, vindictive betrayal. And because these realities are never allowed to touch, they experience absolutely zero conscious guilt or cognitive dissonance. They don't even have to remember their lies, because they literally just lock the door on that reality the second they leave the room. Let's dig even deeper in Section 3. Neurobiology of the narcissist. We're moving out of pure psychology and straight into hard neuroscience now. When we clinically map the brain's corrupted functions, it proves that covert narcissism is a deeply rooted neurobiological issue, not just some character quirk. Look at the medial prefrontal cortex. We actually see lowered gray matter volume here, which is heavily linked to a massive deficit in empathy. Then, there are structural abnormalities in the anterior insular cortex, completely disrupting emotional regulation. Add in the reduced local efficiency in the default mode network, which handles how we process self-related information, and it's crystal clear. Their brains are quite literally wired to prioritize themselves and completely shut down empathy when they're dealing with someone in distress. And here's a pretty wild statistic. Up to 75% of diagnosed narcissistic personality disorder cases are male. This naturally forces us to zoom out and ask some tough questions about the dark evolutionary roots of this behavior. Why would human evolution preserve traits that are this destructive? Well, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint,
These manipulative cluster B traits might have actually been incredibly adaptive for short-term survival and reproduction in our ancestral past. Cultivating social dominance, ruthless self-preservation, strategically exploiting resources, these traits often equaled increased mating success. It's a high-risk evolutionary strategy. It completely prioritizes passing on genes right now over any kind of long-term relational stability. They are essentially operating on this ancient, unconscious drive to dominate and extract, treating the people around them as nothing more than instrumental resources.
Which brings us to Section 4, the weapon of distortion. We have to investigate the primary weapon they use to maintain this psychological control and exact tribute from their victims: gaslighting. Now, gaslighting gets thrown around a lot on the internet as a buzzword, but we need to grasp its true clinical depth. It is not just lying. It is a deliberate, systematic neurological disruption. This weapon specifically targets your reality testing capabilities. When someone you depend on for safety, like a partner or a parent, systematically denies your reality, it causes profound betrayal trauma. It forces your brain into a horrifying double bind. You literally have to choose between believing your own eyes and ears or maintaining your attachment to the person you need for survival. When we track the insidious progression of this psychological warfare, we see exactly how that double bind traps the victim. It starts small, in phase 1, mild confusion. You just sense something is slightly off. Then it morphs into phase 2, cognitive dissonance, where your brain is agonizing over conflicting beliefs, like, they love me, but they keep hurting me. By phase 3, we hit betrayal blindness. This is a terrifying survival mechanism, where your brain subconsciously denies the abuse entirely, just to preserve the feeling of safety. Clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani actually calls this the whoosh effect. Finally, it crashes into phase 4, somatic collapse. Your mind has sacrificed its own reality just to survive the relationship, and your physical body takes the full, devastating blow. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, rebuilding a fractured reality. Understanding the profound neurobiological depth of this trauma explains exactly why standard cognitive talk therapy so often fails these victims right out of the gate. You cannot simply think your way out of a nervous system injury. The physical body has to be rehabilitated first. Recovery isn't about correcting your thoughts. It is a process of deep somatic nervous system education. Based on the work of trauma specialists like Peter Levine, true healing requires the nervous system to finally finish those incomplete defensive actions we talked about earlier. You have to physically discharge that stored trauma. It's all about accumulating small, safe experiences over and over until your body realizes it is finally permissible to trust its own signals again without the threat of being attacked. So how do we actually do that? We turn abstract healing into a rigorous, actionable methodology. Step 1 is the orienting response. Deliberately looking around your current environment to gather tangible safety cues, actively pulling your brain out of the past trauma and into the present moment. Step 2 is perception documentation, physically writing down your daily perceptions before you ever check them with someone else, building an undeniable track record of your own accuracy. And step 3 is the body check before override. When you feel that tightness in your chest or that drop in your gut, you consciously consult it before your brain tries to rationalize it away. You are progressively, painstakingly rebuilding your interoceptive trust from the ground up. We're going to leave you with this final provocative thought for today's explainer. True recovery isn't just about figuring out the narcissist's behavior or finally seeing through their mask. It is about teaching your own nervous system that the threat has actually passed. Your body broke down because it couldn't safely exist in reality. So healing means teaching your body that it is finally safe to see the truth, and more importantly, that it's safe to trust yourself again. So what small step will you take today to show your nervous system that it is finally safe?